How's it going, guys? And welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm covering more DCL stuff because there's not a lot to talk about right now, and I'm currently away. So I'm trying to get ahead of this upload early, and this is just a really nice, chill thing to kind of sit back and talk about. Don't expect a crazy amount going on screen, by the way. So if you just kind of want to sit back and listen to me ramble for probably about 20-ish minutes, then feel free. So today I'm going to talk about Tera this next video, and in particular the way that people are trending in usage. This DCL, I think, is a very fair reflection of that, because that is when people are trying to maximize the success of teams, especially now with live drafts, which means you kind of need to be incredibly flexible in your offense, especially because it's draft live range. Draft live range makes people think in a very particular way. So I think it's really interesting to kind of look at these stats and break them down and why things are the way that they are. Before I dive in, I just want to say thanks to Autumn for getting this out, getting the draft stats out right before I actually sit down and record this. I do appreciate it. It's my life a hell of a lot easier. So the way I want to structure this is I kind of want to break it down in increments of a couple points, because obviously you have your top tiers, and then I'm probably going to be spending a lot of time discussing the 16 to 14 point range, because there's a lot of really interesting kind of conversations to be had there in terms of trends of the last year, realistically. So without further ado, let's get in. I just lost my train of thought there, that's fine. So we start with the obvious three, and the obvious three are incredibly obvious. 20 is the best Teramon right now. Its consistency cannot be denied. It's just doing super well at everything, whether that's fat pivots, block breaking, cleaning up the pop instances. I think that's kind of rare these days. It's just super consistent, and to the surprise of absolutely nobody, it's a top pick. So, and it went third in every single draft. So that's to the surprise of absolutely nobody. Raging Bolt is one that, in terms of team structures itself, I don't think people have quite figured out the best way to have Raging Bolt structures. And I think that's particularly true when you see that the best performing Raging Bolt team in DPL was one where it ended up on that team's mids because another team dropped it. So it ended up with an Iron Man, which I think is a rare case, but it happens sometimes. Overall, Bolt itself as a mon is doing super well, because the fact that like teams are struggling to kill it, its combine sets are super potent, or it can just attack one in front of it, be an absolute nuisance, or incredibly strong breaker. So it's no surprise that this mon is kind of constantly going around 1, end around, start around 2, I think, in some instances. But it's, for me, it is the second best Teramon right now, because I think I used to go back and forth with it to Rude, but I think what's happening with Rude at the minute is it's having the same issue in regards to structures and how it's not quite finding the same structure success it was around this time last year, where it was going around 2. We were seeing it a lot with Iron Valiants and stuff like that. But it's not having the same success individually that Bolt is having. And because, yes, we're going to have the odd matchup where it can pop off, particularly against like the fatter structures, but I think people are just really well equipped for Root at the minute, and are prepping very specific ways that makes it very difficult for them. It's still a great mod, don't get me wrong. I just think there's, some refinery needed. So kind of keep that a little bit below, but it definitely deserves to be 19 points, and it makes complete utter sense that it got drafted every single draft. In terms of some other top tiers, to briefly mention, Ogrepon Wellspring going 3 times, I think lines up with my expectations. Ogrepon people have feeling strongly about his one type placement, but Water Ice Cudgel is still super good, really nice utility, and it's just a really potent mon with a really nice typing. And water resists are hard to come by at the minute, so I think it makes sense. Enam going twice is an interesting topic of discussion, because obviously this mon got a price drop going into this event, and The issue with it has been that people haven't been able to get the structures that they want. And obviously it went later, these drafts. Nobody actually went for ENAM. In comparison to previous events where you'd see constantly round 1, round 2. People were going for, in the middle of the draft. So in theory, these teams should have better success because there's more pieces that suit ENAM. But it is a very difficult fit onto teams. So I'm really interested to see how this goes. And if it kind of doesn't work out as expected, maybe expect some more price drops in the future. Speaking of price drops, we probably have a few more to discuss, but I want to quickly mention Great Puzzle, because I'm surprised it was only Tera once. I thought people were kind of very much going in the direction that Tera Tusk was a necessity, because what Tusk does regular mod by itself just isn't quite cutting it with the way the metagame's going. Kind of the screen spam and the fat route neither really suits Tusk that well. That's why it's kind of clearly gone to fourth choice in terms of round 1 mods. Like, it's still, it's a great Tusk, it does everything you want it to, but I thought people wanted that extra option in Tera. But a lot of people didn't, and that will be an interesting topic of discussion when we kind of get into the more mid-tiers. But we then go to the draft section here with high screens that are too far. And we see these, none of which have any usage at right now. Obviously, that could change at mids, who knows. But Gren, Blaziken, and Iron Bolt. Now, Gren is probably the most interesting one here, because it's won back-to-back seasons. More so, but I don't think they're really because of the Tera Gren. I think they're more so just the way that those events have gone. But Tera Gren was really being seen as top 5 minimum by a lot of people around Drafting World Cup time, Drafting World Cup 1 that is. And then it did get some usage last DCL, wasn't anything crazy. But I think it's just the way that Gren has gone. And obviously with other darks kind of usurping Gren in popularity, whether that be Darkrai, whether it be Roaring Moon, you do kind of see that Gren has gone a different direction. And it's not really seen in the same, like, oh, I'm going to claim my kill, I'm going to get Battle Bond, and I'm just going to win. It's not treated the same way anymore. So I think it makes sense that there's no Tera Gren usage, and it'll be interesting to see, does Tera Gren get a price drop at the same price as regular Gren? Or regular Gren itself, which I think would be a surprise. So 17-point Tera Gren for autumn seasonal could be something to keep an eye on. Speaking of 17s, we have Blaziken and Iron Folding. 2 mons that in their own individual rights are great. You see Blaziken so often just positioning itself for SD sweeps. I think Blitz and Trick House did it on a regular basis. And Iron Boulder is a phenomenal revenge killer or angler too. The issue with these mods is that they're very different on team. Yes, Iron Boulder was seeing a lot of play last DCL because on Iron Valley, for example. But it seems those have kind of gone a very different direction this time around, and I think that just kind of shows how the metagame has shifted in the last year, and that is just not suitable whatsoever. And I think with Blaziken, the issue is how the hell do you draft around this thing in an 8-month capacity? It is an incredibly difficult thing to do, particularly at this price. So I wonder will both of these ones drop, and I think there would be a serious shakeup going into not only autumn seasonal, but also stuff like circuit finals or whatever tour goes into like the DLWC slot. It'll be really interesting to see what people are able to do if you kind of, have these options cheaper, and if some other stuff is around. So let's get on to kind of the more what I would call high mid tier, and we start with the 2 that went 4 times, and neither of them are surprising. Urshifu Rapid Strike has been doing really well all year. Kind of started off by Infernal Armory because on that Travis Ladias Yesco Rapid team that L5 was using, just because it was able to SD up Grand Punching level a lot and just did serious work. It's now gotten to the point where Rapid Strike is kind of seen on far superior, or at the very least on par, with its single strike counterpart, depending on who you ask. And the nice thing about Rapid Strike is you can kind of just slap it onto a hell of a lot of different team structures that are very, like these days, like very clear ideas that you see a lot. And I think that just kind of really improves the water fight in general. this also applies to Kelly, a mon that has also been seeing a lot of usage recently, whether that be Alpha farming with it, VR, I might mention it twice when it comes to these things, I do not know, or you look at its success in on Who's team in DCL, in Tera Hydrapple, or you look at the Ghosting form, where it got a lot of usage there as well, to the point where it deservedly got a price rise. And honestly, a price rise that was high enough in my opinion. The combine sets are incredibly good, so if you're not prepared for them. Water resists in general kinda suck right now, so that just makes like Tera Water, like specs and under pumps hurt a lot. And it's just sitting in a really nice spot here for the metagame too, where it can kind of come in on the fatter bits and abuse them while at the same time having Vacuum Wave for some of those more faster threats, or Calm Mind to get around the faster threats as well. So I don't think it's any surprise that they both went 4 times, and I think on mids, will one of them become 5? I think it's relatively plausible. So I do kind of expect the two of these to do well, and then will we see 17 pointers for Rapid? I think so. I think LDO and 16 makes complete better sets, but we'll see how it develops. We then look at Hydrapple. I've talked about this thing on the channel already. Hydrapple's just good. There's some interesting Hydrapple core ideas in this event. One of them that kind of comes to mind. This kind of did become the mon that went on Iron Battle, which was not what I was expecting, but I think it makes sense. Yeah, that's pretty good. Shock. You know, it's a boot sponge, it's regen, mini core, dash front sets are super good, really good coverage, a plethora of options that team that respect. Forces on the board, which is what does it for this gen. So, yeah, no major surprise that even with the price hike it's gotten in recent months up to 16, it's still getting usage. I didn't think it would go in every draft, because 16 is pretty expensive for what it does, but it getting usage, no surprise. And then you see Iron Moth here as well. That's also not surprising. This mon has always gotten usage as a Tera captain, so seeing more of it. And while yes, its partners have kind of changed around a bit, you know, you don't really see Sinistra, which was a common one last DCL. We're seeing a lot of Iron Moth Sinistra actually. I think a lot of that could be to do with the change to the 28 points Tera captain system. But Moth is great. We all know what Iron Moth does. So it's super reliable. And yeah, it's one of those ones that it's very difficult to move its price because it's kind of hard to justify. But at the same time, it's still great at what it does, and it makes complete under sense why it's getting usage. And then we kind of have a fun middling section here, the 2 usage. These 4, I think, are kind of the way to discuss it. Not that surprising because of its success for PTE on that one team they had. That was kind of very boot spam, a lot of fat pivots, and it was just getting Chiyu into really opportunistic positions to cause havoc. So I think we're seeing a lot of construction again. You see Boo using often Tera Chiyu as his break on his team this time around. So I think it makes sense that Chiyu is getting used again, particularly, as I said, with the fatter way, and also because of the fact that deal crazy damage to the offensive stuff on the screen spam as well. That is a big deal. So it's not really that surprising to see Chiyu getting usage. Annihilate is an interesting one. I think it makes sense because you can use Annihilate regularly because it's a pretty consistent ghost when it comes to spin blocking. Like, yeah, maybe it's not quite as good against Tusk as other things, but it can run everything sets and pivot around, particularly if Tusk isn't Tera, which kind of seems to be the case for this event. So I'm glad that people are trying it again, because obviously Annihilate was a menace early in the gen, then as time's gone on, it's kind of lost its popularity. It kind of ebbed and flowed a bit. You saw the odd one here and there doing well. So let's see how it goes here. It'll be interesting to see, and it's with a lot of like interesting partners, or just other interesting Tera ideas that I think are fun. Then you've Gliscor and Iron Gun. 2 mons that got a lot of Tera usage in DL with the change in Tera system. sense. The two of them are super consistent with Tera. Gliscor saw super well with Tera, DCL, especially early on the season, actually. So I wonder if people kind of widened up that a little bit, but like, you can't really answer that until games played, and when I'm recording this video, not a single game has been played yet, so I don't have the answers for you. But, you know, it just makes the offensive sets really good, or it can, like, set spikes in situations where you didn't need to be able to set spikes, or, you know, some cosmic attack can be annoying still, just with the cosmic dynamics in terms of when you break the sub, you're not breaking the sub. So, yeah, Gliscor's, I don't need to explain what Gliscor does. Gliscor is great. And Tera Gliscor, I think, makes sense that it's getting usage. I thought it would get more. I thought it would be at least 3. But obviously, it was a limited season, so... Like, 13 is a good price for it. And Iron Crown is getting serious love the last 6 months as well. It's definitely... It's really interesting. It's kind of gone above Metagross in terms of the Steel Psychic conversation. Because the fact that Attack Cutter is really good, and the options that it has just seems to be really nice for great predictive structures. I think Iron Crown went before Metagross a lot, actually. So that's an interesting one to keep an eye on in terms of will that stay consistent, or will Metagross kind of shine through, which would be what I would expect. But how many times have I been wrong at this point? Who knows? So yeah, the two of them at 13, I think, are really good value, and I'm not surprised whatsoever that they're getting use, and I wouldn't be surprised if you kind of come mid-season and begin to look at them more. Like, obviously, Iron Crown, I don't think I've drafted in every draft. I'm just looking across and going, no, that's interesting. And neither did Gliscor. So you definitely could see some teams like picking up Gliscor just to kind of use it as that sort of Tera cap is flexibility. I think Crown is in the same boat. These are just the flexible consistent guys. I guess both are also there because we're seeing a lot more like some depth for some type sets being used. So they're interesting. And then you go down to kind of the ones that were kind of heroically that we've seen used before. Tera Golden Go, which I think might have been overtook on that draft, I'm not gonna lie. But I'm interested to see how it does. I'm pretty sure that team has a tusk. So Tera Golden Go is an interesting choice. I do like Tera Golden Go, but I'm not sure about it in an event like this in 2025. Tera Thunder T I love, and I'm glad they're still getting some usage. Like, that was a really consistent team that Triggerby had that I was able to use once. And yeah, Tera Thunder T is just a giant threat if you don't respect it. Well, it's a giant threat in general. If you don't respect it, it will murder. And then yeah, you have some more interesting mid-tier attempts here. Necrozma is... I'm not sure about it, solely because of something that we will get to later. Metagross I've wanted to kind of play around with for a while because it definitely does have Tera cap potential. Weavile is on the same team as Signal Dengo in terms of the one that I think is slightly overcooked, but I'm interested to see how that goes. Keytran did super well in DPL, but I think that might also just be because Castelia is just goated. So we'll see, is it Lamon or is it person? My bet's going to be person though, but we'll see. And then, yeah, we'll kind of get to the rest of them in a little bit. In terms of notable undrafteds, as we just scroll down here, Pokemon's interesting because I thought teams would maybe look at it because of Google being a major issue at the minute, but nope, no one went Tera Duck. Wonder what that means. Only time will tell, I guess. But I do think Duck, like, yes, it's definitely third right now in terms of the water powers, but it still has a lot of upside, and it can just win games on its own. King Gambit makes sense, that mon is completely fallen off, Ogrepon's completely fallen off. Salamence is one I did not think would fall off. This thing was probably the second most common low-tier Tera after Iron Moth, if you think about it this time last year. So really interesting that that thing's gone to 0 usage now. I wonder is it just because it's a little bit more difficult to fit teams. It's an interesting discussion point though, because I don't think Salamence did anything inherently wrong, or the metagame has gone to the point where it's like Salamence feels unviable. I think people were just kind of looking for other options, as I mentioned earlier. And Any other interesting ones here? Peturant, I thought someone would go there. They didn't. We've no sun, so we've no Terrawaki Wake. That's another fun one. And this was the one I wanted to talk about. This was one I was surprised about. Tera Mew. Now, Mew has been doing really well for itself. We saw regular Mew actually do super well, and win DPL for DUI. But I definitely thought someone would go there because of, you know, the offensive sets are super good. You have the Psychic Fangs backup option because, you know, you need it with how potent screens and light play spam is with all the setup at the minute. And it just has a plethora of options that just makes it so difficult to prep for right now. In a metagame where you have so much to prep for in the first place. So I'm really surprised no one went the Tera direction. Especially seeing as someone new to Tera Necrozma. And I remember the first EPL of Gen 9. Teams didn't go Tera Mew, and then you kind of saw influx of Tera Mews coming in at mids. So I wonder what we kind of see a similar thing this time. I think if there's any mon that kind of stacks multiple usage from 0, it will be Tera. I just think it has won too many games to the point where people just have to respect it. So I think that makes sense. The other thing that's kind of the other bracket I have in my head is kind of the mon who either slap in with the 19s or 20s that I talked about earlier. To kind of make a 2 Tera captain system, or ones that was like, oh, I have some leftover points, let me just kind of throw it on here. So, Rhyperior is not one I did not think would kind of reach this level of popularity. I get it that people are very unsure in terms of what is the best way to approach ground types at the minute. Once you kind of pass a very different point, and that point right now seems to be Blizzcore. Or Lando I guess. But I'm interested to see how it does, especially seeing as it's not really going to be Tera often, because it's definitely with your 19s. So, we'll see. I do like Rhyperior. I think Tera Rhyperior is great in the right matchups. I just don't think it's actually going to get usage. Kind of the same with Cyclizar. Cyclizar was definitely being drafted for its, you know, as remove potential. Like, as you can see here, it's one of only 2 mons that were under, you know, 10 points that got drafted in every single draft. And I'm not surprised by it. It makes total sense. And that's something that I will cover in a few weeks, is just how the hazard metagame moved on, and how people have changed their approach, particularly in their preference for spinners, or also the rise of defogers. So, I will kind of leave a lot of my Cyclizar thoughts there. But Tera Cyclizar, I think Mad Men used it last season, and it did pretty okay for them. So, you know, it's a fine Tera captain. It does the job. Avalugg, like I said, just kind of falls into that, oh, we have a few leftover points. Tera Avalugg is just, you know, kind of falls in the same boat as stuff like Mastodon, where it just can kind of shut things down if it has to. Iron Fist body press sets are good, with pick and typing. Sometimes you can just run into a matchup where it's like, oh, they don't have enough prep for this. It just wins. So, that's fun. Tera Crest, then, as we kind of move down a little bit. Tera Crest got some use in DPL, and it definitely makes sense because you've a fat psychic with levitate that just doesn't die and can definitely win some like a well-timed Tera with like combine sets. But once again, it kind of falls in the same bracket. Do I really see this thing tearing that often? No. Also, I skipped over on Cornerstone. That's just because I'm not really sure why people were tearing with Cornerstone. Like, don't get me wrong, Strong Rock Stab is cool. I don't really think there's many matches where you would actually tear your Cornerstone. And I think that's typically tiered with like the 16s and like that 16 to 13 bracket that we've already talked about, where I think those ones definitely tear on a more consistent basis. So, like, don't get me wrong, I'm glad the Cornerstone's getting usage, and I think Cornerstone is great. But, yeah, 2 Tera ones is a surprise. Let's put it that way. Low Kicks is fun. Low Kicks is a mod I feel like we haven't seen in a while. Because, like, you kind of saw it more in, like, low tier Tera. Or, like, maybe when the points limits were a little bit more restricting. I'm just because like tinted lens first impressions were doing really good, like priority was super strong. I think we've come back to a point where its priority is incredibly undervalued. I think people recognize that, and that's why they've gone for it. So I'm really interested to see how it does. Because Logix is a really cool mod in theory, it's just sometimes very difficult to get it and do well. So I think kind of having it as a 7th mod that the teams have to respect, I think will be really interesting to kind of see how it goes. There's some more cheap ones here. The Suian Typhlosion, that's, you know, Suian Typhlosion in theory should be a good mod, but really it isn't. Carbink, you know, it's a mod that just kind of gets slapped on a bunch of teams, and Ampharos is in the same boat. It's just a good cheap electric type, and it can Tera it can bluff Tera. I think Tera to ground total once all season. That was a trick of that game, hopeless. So we'll move on from that. But they're kind of some of the options we went for. I kind of thought there were more that were kind of consistent. But in terms of the list of those, I can't say there's anything inherently wrong with them. Okay, move down. Tera Mola, that's just a foo moment. At least I'm pretty sure it's a foo moment. Tera Mesprit kind of goes in the same bracket as Cresselia, but Mesprit got a lot more usage around. It was kind of early DLC mechanics. You were seeing Tera Mesprit was like cheap second. All at the same time you can see my Tera Card. So Terracon, yeah, Terracon is good. That's not surprising. Tera Mandibles, that's an interesting one. That would be interesting. That I don't even know what the idea is. That's a fun one to keep an eye on. And Amherst Key, another one that kind of was falling away last year, but is still a good mod because, you know, good coverage, healing wish, plethora setup options can definitely go guard. That's the thing with these, is a lot of them are kind of like 7 bonds, or maybe 6 bonds that don't have to come to every single game. So, and the nice thing about those sometimes, especially in conjunction with, less so what it is with kind of the big break, and more if you're, you know, you kind of have the 16 to 13 pointers, is that these ones can show up and people be like, oh, I actually have 2 respect being Tera. So I think teams are kind of using that fact, and we saw it a lot more this season of teams going for that like 16 to 13 range, and then 2 of them in the middling numbers, or you know, a higher middle value, and then just like cap it off with like an Avalog or Ampharos, as I said, like Carbon. So these are kind of interesting attempts, and mods we have seen have success in the past, like the Guardian Active here, this thing was really strong. I say really strong, was definitely higher priced earlier in the gen, and then people kind of copped off with Overcloak, so we'll see how long that guard is. But I think at 8 points it has some potential on the right team. Keyword on the right team. Reuniclus is one that I've heard a lot of people talking about because of its lower price. Yeah, it's gonna be good. I imagine it'll do super well. Regen's been a magic guard, like setup, pretty cool offensive at end games, and just like have the right Terra Blast sometimes. So I'm really like Reuniclus just seems like one of those sorts of mods that deal really well with where the metagame is right now. So we'll see how it gets on. I imagine we'll catch on to that trend. Comfey was good once upon a time, but it just doesn't quite work. Valley Bolt, that's another one that got a lot more usage as a Terra captain a couple of years ago. Just doesn't quite anymore. Bombus knows great. Heals a fun one. Chestnut, Articuno, I imagine that was by a Brit. We all know how that works. Terra Dustnor's fun. Vicavolt. Yeah, nothing else really too crazy here in this one point. Suian Avalog, because probably Avalog is too expensive. But I just want to end this talking about some more interesting undrafts here. Just keep scrolling down. First one I thought might get some usage. I forgot to kind of mention that previous session. I thought it might get some because of the way, like I said, with the way fat is gone. And it's kind of a similar attempt to Chiyu in regards to holy crap, this bone can break. And it can break really well. So I thought someone might go there, especially with the ground side things I mentioned earlier, but it's clear that people want to go the Terra here rather than this, just with a price thing. So guess that makes sense. That was just kind of my inkling. No Tera Sinistra is incredibly interesting. This thing was getting really good usage, and a lot of the time with Iron Moth, and I mentioned this as well when I was talking about Sinistra. Procrastinate. If you didn't see that, you can find it on the channel somewhere. But it's really interesting that Sinistra's gone to 0 Tera usage. And I don't think it's anything... I wonder if that's just because of the fact that everyone is shifting towards, like, you know, you're seeing a lot more Roar, you're seeing a lot more Dragon Tail, you're seeing Encore, so it just makes Sinistra a lot more difficult to thrive in terms of the set that you needed Tera for. So you're going more the utility route, and those sets just don't require Tera. Or if it is just, you know, prefer other options at those prices. You know, you see your Crowns, you see your Annihilators, you see Moths only a couple more points. And the partners with Moth have kind of changed. You know, Keldeo is one that's probably happened a lot, so that is not what I expected whatsoever. I did think we would see some more Sinistra usage. In terms of the rest of the year, Sarah-Ledge, I did think someone would, based on the success of the Trick Fight team, but that kind of seemed to be a standalone event. I don't think we've seen the Sarah-Ledge have any sort of success anywhere since, so that's an interesting one. And then I thought Hatterene might, with no songs, so yeah, I was thinking about Lilligant. Tera Infernape was actually an interesting conversation, and it also kind of ties into Tera Terrakion in terms of, I think if Infernape was a point cheaper and was able to kind of go on Tera Torn teams, you would have seen a lot of Tera Infernape. Because Tera Infernape right now just kind of seems to be in a position where Infernape itself is good, especially from like a defensive utility standpoint. Whereas I think with Tera, you can actually open up its offensive capabilities in a lot of matchups. In terms of like Mastermind sets and SD sets, like that. So it makes it really interesting. So I do think if it was a point cheaper, it would have gotten a lot more use. And I wonder, is that something that will be addressed kind of come on season? Like, will we see Infernape drop down in price? And will that lead to like territory Tera Infernape sort of structures? An interesting thought, that. And Terrakion was kind of the go-to in DPL to go alongside Torn, but people definitely kind of look different directions. I think a lot of those were, you know, your Tera Inferiors or went with some cheaper options. So that's just what happens. I think over the course of a couple months, people's opinions change on Mons, and they just kind of don't go that direction. And to kind of round off the fighting trifecta, you have Tera Yogi here that has gone to 0 usage. And this is a mod that gets a fair bit of usage, whether that be DCL, DPL, seasonals, NFA 12, I guess, because he makes Tera look stupid. But no one bit the bullet, which I was surprised about. I definitely thought we would see this thing getting usage again, but it probably falls in the same issue as Infernape of it being 9 rather than 8. And if this thing could go with Torn, I think he would put it with Torn. And obviously, once teams become cheaper, those extra couple points you get to higher caliber Terramons. And that's just what happens sometimes. So, like, Okidogi's one of the ones that you can't deny that it's good for the Terra Cap, but it's definitely going to end low. So I imagine it's kind of risky that to double usage again. I wonder will that kind of be a DPL thing, or maybe this is just it. Tera Diancie, you know, it's not 2023, so that thing's not getting usage. Tera Moltres was one that I thought might get usage. I'd say it's open discussions a few times with teams, because teams need reliable birds these days, and Moltres is a reliable bird. And yes, it doesn't use Tera often, and likes it as a bluff, but it can definitely still use it. And I think that is... Okay, no, I'm gonna lie, I thought someone would pull the trigger on Tera Spectre. And it wasn't a big. Also, no Tera Misbag. Well, I guess that was a trick of eye cook, and when you have no trick of eye, you don't really kind of see that sort of thing. But yeah, I definitely thought someone would go for Slitherwing here. With the lower price. I thought someone would kind of try it. Especially with the fact that you could afford more tape, but like I said, people want to rip here instead. And I think that's everything that I wanted to cover here. It's really interesting how teams approach drafting in an event like this. Especially when, like I said, about 4 slots, teams can be a lot more careful in regards to how they draft. And you can see that. I think a lot of picks are safe. You don't really see, bonds getting sudden rises. Like, I think the biggest case for the bond that hasn't seen success where it's just kind of getting usage now is Regular. I think that's the only one that should look at this list. I guess you would say Loki, but Loki was getting success down in my trap. But I think that's kind of understandable. So, I think aside from Hyperior, a lot of these are kind of tried and tested. So it was clear that teams didn't want to take risks with Tera captains. So, and I wonder will that kind of carry through in mid-season, or will teams kind of start taking risks more in regards to if they feel like their SV just isn't quite working out because it's not dealing with kind of the trend of the game, whether that be because SV right now is kind of one extreme it's either, very fast, pivoting a lot, getting up to hazard, spin blocking, knocking off boots. That's why you're seeing so much like Petra runs or structures and things like that. Or you're seeing the most offensive end of it where it's just screen spam into I'm going to set up all over your face and then try to sweep with something, and if plan A doesn't work, I'll go to plan B, which is the same, and plan C, which is a different sweeper, things like that. So I think it makes sense that teams have gone with stuff that they know. And I wonder will teams go a different route in a couple weeks' time, come mid-season. Obviously, impossible to say right now because there's not been a single game played, and it's really difficult to kind of make opinions on drafts without using them or seeing them used. So only time. I might have to revisit it in a couple of weeks to do an update in regards to like Tera captain changes. But I hope you've enjoyed me rambling my way through the kind of Tera captain, giving my thoughts in regards to what was used. I might come back to these usage stats and just do like a random recap when I'm back, just kind of going over maybe SV in general, might cover some of the old gens, things like that. Because I do kind of want to keep up some DCL content. I don't want to cover any games or anything like that, obviously, because that's just a really weird thing to do mid-season. But I do just kind of want to cover some adjacent content, as well as just discussing general draft topics, because I don't want this to just become a DCL channel to the point where once DCL ends, it feels like I've nothing to do. So I do want to make sure that I'm keeping up with the discussions, and I have more of that in the future. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed my thoughts and feelings in terms of the SV Tera captains for DCL III, and I shall catch you in the next video. Peace!